Hi, everybody. Just getting a few things set up here. Just crossing my T's and dotting my I's. We'll start in about 12 seconds. I'm not going to count it down this week. We're almost ready to go. Well, hello and welcome to this English lesson where we're going to talk about the kitchen. And we're going to talk about all kinds of things that you would find in the kitchen. I hope that you enjoy this lesson. The kitchen is one of my favorite places in the house because I really like food. I like making food as well, but I do like the kitchen because I like snacks. I like supper time. I like dinner time. I like lunch. I just like eating. I also exercise quite a bit because when you like to eat, you do need to walk quite a bit and you do need to work out to offset the food you eat. Before we get started though, here are a few things you need to know. Please use the chat for English conversations only. If you have a question, please use the link that will be shared by either Todd or Dave or Nightbot. And please enjoy the lesson. I know that it will seem like I'm teaching a lot of really simple vocabulary, but with each word that I teach you, I will try to add a few phrases, and I'll talk about how I use that word in regular everyday speech as we go through it. So anyways, before we start, let me do a sound check. Looks like everything is working great. It looks like we can get started. So I'm going to start by teaching you 3 verbs that we use when we're in the kitchen. Sometimes we bake in the kitchen, sometimes we cook in the kitchen, and sometimes we make things in the kitchen. Let me back up. When we bake, we're usually talking about things like bread or cookies or pies. So I could say, today I'm going to bake bread. Today I'm going to bake a pie. Tomorrow I'm going to bake muffins. Usually when we are baking, we are putting things in the oven. So the oven is the appliance where you open the door, you put something in and you close it. But usually when we bake, we're talking about things that we make out of flour. I do need to add as well, this is a very North American English lesson. The English that I am teaching you today about the kitchen will also reflect that these are things that we do in Canada and the United States. So this, I know around the world, there are different ways to prepare food. This lesson is very much a North American English lesson. So we bake bread, we bake pies, we bake cakes. Those are all really yummy things, by the way. One moment I forgot my glasses and I'm already having trouble reading stuff. We also cook in the kitchen. So when you cook things, generally you cook things on the stove top. So again, the oven is where you put things in. The stove top is where you put pots and pans and frying pans and you cook things. So generally we cook foods that we will be eating for our meals. So you would cook spaghetti, you would cook hamburgers, you would cook hot dogs, you would cook a meal. You would say that tonight, who's cooking tonight? Is Jen cooking or is Bob cooking? So cooking refers to the general practice of preparing meals. If it's a meal where you need to heat it up. If you don't need to heat up the meal, you're not cooking it. But if you're confused about whether to use bake or cook, here's the simpler way to refer to things. We often just use the verb make when we're talking about food. So if you think about all of the food items I've already mentioned, I could say, oh, I might make bread today. I might make cupcakes today. I might make hamburgers today. I might make hot dogs today. I'm thinking that tonight I might make spaghetti. So if you don't know whether to use bake or cook, the simple way out is to just use the verb to make. So often we make supper. Jen and I take turns making supper. Actually, I think I've mentioned this before. In the summer, when Jen is busy on the flower farm, I make supper most of the time. We can also use dinner. In the winter, Jen makes supper more than I do because I'm a little busier than her. So if you're not sure whether to use bake or cook, just use make. The place in the kitchen where you prepare a lot of things is called the counter or the countertop. So you can see the surface here. That is the area where you prepare food, okay? So it's not where you cook food. It's where you prepare food in order to cook it. We are often preparing food on our countertop in order to get it ready to cook. So when I make cupcakes, I first get all the ingredients out and I use the countertop to prepare the food for the oven. The oven, again, just to review, is the appliance that heats to a certain temperature. Often when you are cooking, actually all the time when you are baking or cooking using the oven, you will preheat the oven to a certain temperature. Interestingly enough, all of our recipes in Canada are still in Fahrenheit because we love the United States and we do a lot of things the same as them. When you use the oven to bake something, you will preheat the oven. It'll say preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So you will preheat the oven, then you will prepare the food that you want to bake, and then you will put it in the oven. I should mention, you don't just bake in the oven. You can also roast things in the oven. So when you're preparing meats, you often use the word roast. You know, I'm going to roast some chicken in the oven. I'm going to roast a roast in the oven. And I think we would even say cook. I think I would cook chicken in the oven. Just use the verb make. It's a lot easier. We also have the stove or the stovetop. So the stovetop or stove is the place where you cook things. Just let me do one thing here, folks. I forgot to open something up before I started the lesson. There we go. Now I can keep track of where I am. So the stove does not need to be preheated too much. You just get a pot or pan, you put it on the stove, and you start to cook. We also have what's called a microwave. So I remember as a kid, when I was about 10 years old, we bought a microwave. It was a brand new thing in the world. We had never seen it before. My dad and mom came home from the store and said, we bought a microwave. And I said, what is a microwave? And then we spent about a month, I remember as a child, learning how to heat different things up in the microwave or how to cook different things in the microwave. Probably the coolest thing for me was that you could microwave an egg. I don't do that anymore because I don't like the taste of a microwaved egg. By the way, you need to poke the yolk with a fork before you try that. I usually fry my eggs in a frying pan. But yes, a microwave is interesting. You put food in, you punch in the amount of time you want to cook it, and you hit start, and then it beeps when it is done. So generally, we use our microwave to thaw things out or to cook some things, some small things. But usually we use our stove or oven when we are making food. Let's see here. We also on our counter, by the way, I'm talking about appliances right now that are on your counter. On our counter, we have a toaster. We often put bread in the toaster. We put the toaster down and we wait for the toaster to pop up. When the toaster pops up, you decide if the bread is brown enough or if it is toasted enough. If it's not, you put the toaster down again. Sometimes if you put the toaster down too many times, the toast will burn. Sorry, I have a little bit of a little tickle in my throat. But let's talk about the toaster from the beginning again. You get 2 slices of bread, you put it in the toaster. This is a 2-slice toaster. You can also buy a 4-slice toaster. We have a 4-slice toaster because there's lots of people in the family. You put the toast down or you put the toaster down. You can use either phrase. And then you wait. After a certain amount of time, it pops up and you kind of look, oh, that toast isn't as brown as I would like it, or that toast isn't as toasted as I would like it, and you put it down again. There's also a dial where you can set how long the toaster toasts the toast. You want me to say that sentence again? You can set how long the toaster toasts the toast before it pops up. We also, on our counter, and on many counters in North America, you will find a coffee maker. Now, the coffee maker has changed over the last few years. Many years ago, we had an older style. Most people now have this style, which is a single cup coffee maker. I think you could call it like an Instabrew, or ours is from a company called Keurig, and many people just call it a Keurig now. But it is a coffee maker that makes 1 cup of coffee. This is the style of coffee maker that I have in my kitchen. It's very, very handy because I'm the only one that drinks coffee and I only drink 1 cup. So it's nice to be able to just make 1 cup of coffee. Let's see where I am here. We also have a kettle. We do drink tea in our family, and sometimes we will boil water in the kettle. Let me go back to the coffee maker though. The coffee maker takes pods. you put a pod in the coffee maker. It is a small amount of coffee that's pre-packaged. You put it in the coffee maker, you close the lid, and you select how much coffee you want, depending on the size of your mug. I actually don't use pods though. I have a reusable filter that makes exactly 1 cup of coffee. So we also have a kettle. Sometimes we put the kettle on. That means that you put water in the kettle and you start the kettle, and then people can wait until, sometimes they whistle. Our kettle does not whistle when it's done. It automatically turns off. You hear a little click, and then you know the water has boiled and you can make some tea. But definitely we have a kettle as well. We also on the counter have a knife block. So in many North American kitchens, you will have a block of wood with lots of little holes in it, and then different size knives for cutting different things. So we have a knife block in our kitchen as well. It has different knives for cutting different kinds of food. And it also has what are called steak knives along the bottom, which is a small knife for eating different meats. And we have a pair of scissors in our knife block. The most common thing for people in our house to say about the knife block is, where are the scissors? Who used the scissors last? Did somebody forget to put the scissors back in the knife block? So that is probably the most popular pair of scissors in our house, and it often goes missing. In the kitchen as well, you will have cupboards. So cupboards or cabinets, we usually call them cupboards, but cupboards are the things with doors that you can open, and that is where you store your food, as well as all your cutlery or utensils or plates and cups and bowls, so your dishware. So cupboards are just small cabinets that you have in your kitchen, and it is a great place to store all of the things that you own. So when we are done doing the dishes, we put all the dishes away in the cupboards. When we come home from the grocery store, we put all the groceries away in the cupboards as well. So we have cupboards where we keep all our pots and pans and plates and bowls and mugs. And we have other cupboards where we keep most of our food, the food that doesn't need to go in the fridge. Let's see here. Oh, Evgenie has become a member of the channel. Thank you so much, Evgenie, for becoming a member. That is awesome of you. Thank you so much for doing that. There are also drawers in the kitchen. So we have kitchen drawers. By the way, we do call them kitchen cupboards, and we do call them kitchen drawers sometimes. So when someone says, do you know where this item is? I can't think of an example. Someone might say, oh, check in the kitchen drawer beside the utensils. So we refer to it as the kitchen drawer. But a drawer is something that you pull out. You can open a drawer to look for certain things. And we do have a special kind of drawer called a utensil drawer. So a utensil drawer is a drawer where we store 3 things in particular: our forks, spoons, and knives. You notice I'm going fairly quickly because a lot of this, I think, is review for you. So I'll try to slow down a little bit, but in our utensil drawer, it might also be called the cutlery drawer. We call it the utensil drawer here in Canada. I'm curious to see what Brent calls it in America, whether they call it a utensil drawer. But in that drawer, we keep primarily the forks that we would use when eating a meal, the spoons that we would use when eating a meal, and the knives we would use. This knife, by the way, is called a butter knife. A butter knife is a knife that is not really sharp. It's made more for spreading things on food than it is for cutting food. So it's usually called a butter knife. I think we should stop and do some questions. Let's do that for a sec, people. I'm trying to keep track. There are a lot of slides this morning, so I'm trying to keep track of where I am to make sure that I keep moving along. Let's see here. First question is from, Brent's got to go. Hey, Brent, thank you so much for the super chat. And thank you for saying have a great chat. Need to go. Have a good day at work, Brent. Thank you very much. Let's see here. Good. Rod, the Brazilian English teacher, says, Mr. Bob, how are you this Friday? I'm good, Rod. I wonder, what's your favorite kitchen appliance? Have a great Friday. Thanks so much. My favorite kitchen appliance, I really like our bread machine. That's a machine that makes bread. You put all the ingredients in, and then 4 hours later, you have a loaf of bread. I really like that. But I think my favorite appliance is my Keurig coffee maker. It is just super nice and easy to use, and it makes me a nice cup of coffee every morning. I do really like that. Katerina says, hi, Bob. How would you describe your kitchen design? So you've seen my kitchen a little bit in the video where I make cookies, and you've seen my kitchen a little bit in the video where I talk about my daily routine. I would describe my kitchen as a country kitchen. A country kitchen is a style of kitchen that is very large, and it's a kitchen that has a big area to make food and a big area where you can eat the food. You can hear my microwave beeping right now, actually. I think someone just made something. A country kitchen usually has a very large table. And usually country kitchens are big because a long time ago, people that lived in the country had really large families. I just happen to have a really large family as well. But Katerina, we would say that I have a country kitchen. Very much an open concept country kitchen. Mike has the next question. Speaking of kitchen, do you use the word spice and seasoning interchangeably? When I'm done cooking something, sometimes I add spices, sometimes I add seasonings. I would use the word spices more often, but we would use those interchangeably, Mike. We do have a lot of different seasonings that we add to our food. We have a lot of different spices that we add to our food. Now, seasoning can also refer to salt, which isn't technically a spice. So I would say spices are your typical spices like paprika or cumin, and seasoning would include things like salt as well. I do want to say hi to the 433 people who are watching. Thank you so much for being here. That is awesome. I'm a little in shock I look at that number beforehand and it's around 30 people. And then at some point during the lesson, it's over 400. So thank you for being here and learning some English. Brent did mention that he would probably call his utensil drawer a silverware drawer. So we do also refer to knives and spoons and forks as silverware. So thanks for that, Brent. That was his parting answer as he headed off to work. Let's see here. Renata. Good morning, sir. I hope you are great. Thanks, Renata. My question for today is, do you use a metallic sponge to wash the dishes? If so, what do you call it? Thanks. Stay safe. Stay safe. We don't use a metallic sponge. We would call it steel wool or an SOS pad. I'm not sure. We use a brush. We use a brush that we buy. It's a brush that's imported from Holland that we use for washing our dishes. So when we do dishes, we have a dish brush and we use that to wash our dishes in soapy water. We do have kind of a sponge that we use sometimes if it's hard to get things off, but we don't use a metal sponge at all. Let's see here. Next question, Ramon, is not about the kitchen, so I'm going to skip it. Sorry, Ramon. Next question is from Artem. Artem says, are you good at cooking? I'm passable. I'm a passable cook. I wouldn't say that I'm amazing at cooking. I can follow a recipe. I can prepare quite a few different kinds of food. I can make pizza from scratch. I can make pizza dough. I can cook simple things like spaghetti. I can fry an egg. I can obviously make toast. I can make a couple of different kinds of soup. I can make tomato soup. I can make squash soup. But mostly, like I can boil potatoes and vegetables and prepare meats with some spices to taste good. So I'm not an amazing cook, but I do an okay job, Artem. So that's how I would respond to that one. Let's see here. Yaha says, how to describe the different places in a kitchen. So that's a difficult one because usually there's just the countertop or counter where you prepare food. There's the stove or stovetop where you cook food. There's the oven where you bake food or roast meats. And there's the sink where you wash things when you are done. So those are really the areas. And then most kitchens in North America also have a seating area where you can sit and eat food while you are in the kitchen. So no real specific names. Next question is not about the kitchen. Going to move along here. So Ruslan says, hello, Teacher Bob. How are you doing? What is the most popular kitchen appliance brand in Canada? Best wishes, sir. Well, that's a good one. I think GE is very popular. I think Danby is very popular. The names change over time. I'm trying to think what our fridge is. I don't even know the names. There were larger companies that every few years they changed the names of their appliances. So, but I would say those two are fairly popular. And I think Samsung is starting to send appliances over as well. Amit says, hi, Bob. Thanks for your live lesson. What does it mean? Throw the kitchen sink at. So when you throw the kitchen sink at something, or it's everything in the kitchen sink, it means you've tried everything, okay? It means that you've not just tried one thing to solve a problem. You've tried every possible thing you can to solve a problem. Ario says, hola, Mr. Bob. No question today. Kitchen topic. Yay. Be safe. Bye-bye. Thanks, Ario. Semra has become a channel member. Thank you, Semra, for being here. You get to have your name in green, and a little while from now, you'll be able to ask some questions. Norma is saying hello. Hi, Norma. SCOO says, sending a cup of hot coffee, Bob. Thank you for the super chat, COO. That is very nice of you. Thank you so much. Let me see here. Kismo, I'm going to do one more. Kismo says, hi, Teacher Bob. How are you doing? I'm good. What is the difference between a kitchen and a kitchenette? Thanks. So this is a great question. In our house, we have a kitchen. When you go to a hotel, sometimes there's a kitchenette in the room. That means there's a really small fridge, maybe a small sink, and maybe a single place to cook some food. A kitchenette is a very, very small kitchen. Sometimes when you rent an apartment, the apartment will be very, very small, and it will, instead of having a full kitchen, it will just have a kitchenette. So it'll have a, like what we would call a hot plate. So a single burner to cook food on, maybe a small sink and a small fridge. So it's a very, very tiny kitchen. I think we borrowed kitchenette. It's kind of like a word. We're trying to make it look a little bit French. It means small kitchen. Thanks, Gizmo. Whom says, hello, Teacher Bob. As far as I know, poutine is the signature dish in Canada. How to cook poutine, and do you like it? Thank you. I do like poutine. As I've mentioned before, poutine is a very, very rich food. Yes, I do know how to make it. It's fairly straightforward. It's French fries with cheese curds and gravy on top. Okay, so as you can tell, French fries are deep fried, so they have a lot of grease or fat in them. Not super healthy. Cheese curds, a very rich and tasty food, and then gravy that melts the cheese a little bit as well. So yummy. It's yummy food. Hey, let's get back to the lesson. Let me move through a few of these more kitchen items, some straightforward stuff here. We have larger spoons, which we call serving spoons. So if I'm serving food, and if people need to get food from a serving bowl, they would use a serving spoon. So if I had a big bowl of potatoes in a serving bowl, there would be a big serving spoon in it. A normal spoon is this big, a serving spoon is this big. So you can scoop up the food that you want. When you eat, you generally eat using a plate. Hey, Tamer, thank you so much for the super chat. That is awesome of you. Thank you very much. A plate is what you use to eat. You might also use a bowl. So a plate is used for things like vegetables and meat and rice or noodles. A bowl is generally used when you eat soup or when you eat stew. So, or cereal. People eat a lot of cereal as well in a bowl. So they'll have a bowl of soup, a bowl of cereal, or a bowl of stew, one of those. You might be wondering the difference between a glass and a mug. I didn't add cup on here. This is a glass because it's made of glass. If this was made of plastic, I would call it a cup. So I have a glass of water here. If it was made of plastic, I would say I have a cup of water. When I drink my coffee in the morning, I drink it from a mug. A mug almost always has a handle on the side. So how much coffee do I drink every day? I have 1 mug of coffee every day, and that's it. And I drink decaf coffee all the time, always decaf. A ladle is what you use when you have something like soup. And we generally talk about scooping, okay? So you would use a ladle to scoop out soup and put it in a bowl. You could say, if I said, how much soup would you like? You could say 1 or 2 scoops, or you could say, oh, I'll have 1 or 2 ladlefuls, okay? But a ladle is something that you use usually for a more liquid food, like a soup or a stew, to scoop it out. I'm just reading Juno saying, Bob the Canadian, you are such an amazing man. I really like your English lessons. Anyway, let me head to the question. Have you ever cooked biryani in your kitchen? No, I have not cooked food from very many places in the world. So, spatula. So here is an interesting one. I actually call this an egg flipper, which is not the real name. So sometimes in your kitchen, you will call something by a name that your family sometimes calls it. I grew up calling this a flipper or an egg flipper, but it's really called a spatula. This is something you use when you're making something, usually in a frying pan, that you need to flip, okay? So you use a spatula to flip an egg. If you were cooking a hamburger patty, you would use a spatula to flip the patty. A spatula is used to flip things that you are frying in a frying pan. This, though, is also a spatula. So this spatula is used to clean out a bowl. When you're baking and when you dump the ingredients out of the bowl, sometimes you use a spatula to clean the bowl out. So this is a spatula. This is a spatula. They have the same name, but they're kind of two different things. Let's see here. This is called a whisk. Sometimes you need to whisk things in a bowl. Sometimes when you are making something, you will put some milk and some eggs and a few other things in a bowl, and then you whisk it. So a whisk is used to whisk. So it has the same name as the action that it does, okay? So when you whisk something, you put it in a bowl, and then you go like this really fast, and you whisk it. Sometimes when you are making something, you need to stir it, and you would then use a wooden spoon. We have a number of wooden spoons in our kitchen. So let's say you're making something that needs to be flipped. You would then use a spatula. If you are cooking something on the stove that needs to be stirred, you would use a wooden spoon. So we use a wooden spoon when we're cooking. Let's say we chop up some vegetables and we have some vegetables and meat in a frying pan. We would use a wooden spoon to stir it. Maybe we're making soup. If we were making soup and we needed to stir it while it was cooking, we would use a wooden spoon. So wooden spoons are very popular when you are cooking or making food in the kitchen when you need to stir the food. We definitely have a can opener. I think this can opener is owned by almost everyone in North America, this exact can opener. There are many different kinds of can openers, of course, but this is, I think, the most popular style of can opener in the entire country of Canada. So you use a can opener when you have a can of food and when you need to take the lid off. So you put the can opener on and you turn the can opener until it goes all the way around the can, and then you take the lid off. You have to be very careful. You don't want to accidentally cut yourself on the lid. And then you dump the food out of the can, and then you rinse the can off in the sink, and you recycle the can and the lid. So a can opener is used to open a can of food that you want to heat up or that you want to cook and eat. Let me just check where I am. A rolling pin. So this is a fun one. When I make pizza, I actually make pizza dough in the bread machine. I'll talk about that a bit more later. But eventually I take the dough out on the counter, and then I put some flour on the counter, and I use a rolling pin to roll the dough flat. A rolling pin is very, very handy. If you are making a pie, when you are making the pie crust, you also use a rolling pin to make it very, very flat. We definitely have a rolling pin. You actually saw the rolling pin in the thumbnail for this video, I'm pretty sure. We also have a mixer. So a mixer has two beaters that you attach to it, and when you turn it on, they spin together. A mixer is actually kind of like a whisk. Often when we are baking something or when we are preparing something to bake it, we put the ingredients in a mixing bowl, and then we use a mixer to mix it. So we mix the ingredients in the mixing bowl with a mixer. Hopefully that made some sense. It has a very distinct sound. You plug the mixer into the wall and then you turn it on and you set the speed and then you mix things up. Something that my kids like to do, if we use a mixer to make cookies or anything that has a sweet dough, my kids like to lick the beater afterwards. So if we make icing or frosting for a cake using the mixer, one of the kids wants to lick all of the icing off when we are done. So that's a very common thing to do when you are baking. Hey folks, I'm going to switch to, I can't believe half an hour has gone by already. Give me 1 second here. We're going to go to members only chat mode. So if you are a member of the channel, first of all, thank you. Second of all, you can now ask questions directly in the chat. We are in members only mode. Try to keep the questions on topic, although I'm pretty friendly about any type of question from you. Let's see here. Madi says, black sheep. I've heard about that idiom. Can you remind me? So we don't use this as much anymore, Madi, because it's a little bit insensitive, but the black sheep of the family would be someone who has gone off and lived a wild life. So if there are 5 people in a family, and if 4 of those people grow up, get a good job, and are living a happy life, but one has gone off to live a wild life as a rock and roll star, we would say they are the black sheep of the family. Rod says, Mr. Bob, as we're food lovers, I wonder why you're slimmer and slimmer and I keep putting on weight. You're awesome. Well, here's what I do, Rod. When I eat too much, then I walk extra steps that day. So that's all I can do. It's like, well, I ate a piece of cake. I better walk an extra 15 minutes today. Annette says, hello, Teacher Bob. Do you have a summer kitchen? Here in Quebec, a lot of Canadian French houses have a summer kitchen. We don't. But we do cook on a barbecue outside. So it's not a summer kitchen, but we do go outside to cook in the summer on our barbecue. Key part, I like knives. I think an appropriate knife is most important when you make food. Definitely. When you're cutting bread, you want a bread knife. When you are buttering bread, you want a butter knife. When you are eating steak, you want a steak knife. It's very important to have the proper knife when preparing food. Panthera Nori, dear Teacher Bob, do you have a word for panettone? For that yummy bread containing fruits, etc. No, but they are available right now in our grocery stores. Huge shipments come in from Europe, and there is definitely panettone and then different versions of it as well. Norma says, I'm not very friendly with kitchen things. I don't like to cook at all. So here's my feeling, Norma. If you like to eat, you should learn to cook. That's what I'm going to say. Corey J, hi Bob, and all the English lovers around the world. Bob, are you able to spend hours in the kitchen preparing sophisticated recipes? Enjoy the lesson and your day. No, like I would like to learn how to make croissants. That's the English pronunciation. I would like to learn how to make fancy pastries, but I'm not a very patient person in the kitchen. I like to make something, bake it, eat it. So I haven't experimented with anything fancy, Corey J. I should someday. Let's see here. Panthera Nori says, Madi Aron knows it better. He gave me that name. Pavel says, hello, Mr. Bob. Do you cook some typical food from Holland? No, we don't eat very much food. Like my parents, when I was a kid, even though they were from Holland, we ate very much North American food as a kid. A lot of potatoes, a lot of meats, a lot of vegetables that we grew in our garden. Panthera says, Teacher Bob explained it exactly. Excellent. Madi says, thanks, teacher. No problem. Seo Wu says, a messy kitchen is a sign of a good meal. So, Seo Wu, that's my least favorite part of the kitchen experience, is cleaning up afterwards. I like making things in the kitchen. I don't like doing all the dishes and cleaning up afterwards. In fact, sometimes Jen and I, when we're really busy, we will prepare meals ahead of time and freeze them. But as we're preparing the meals, we clean up while we're doing it. That's my favorite way to do it. Corey J says, you were talking about your children, but what about you? Do you remember licking the dishes when your mom cooked when you were a kid, especially cakes? Yes, very much so. It was very yummy to eat the batter, the cake batter, Definitely. Isabel Lopez. Hi, Isabel. Good to see you. Hello, Teacher Bob. Have one question. What is more common in Canada, the electric stove or the gas stove? Thanks in advance. So I don't know which is more popular, but most homes, I think, have an electric stove, and then some have gas stoves. Like, I have an electric stove. My brothers both have electric stoves. My sisters have gas stoves. My mom has an electric stove. So maybe that's a good measuring point. Let's see here. By the way, stoves can run off gas or they can run off electricity. Most homes, I think, in Canada, I think electricity, they probably have electric stoves. Evgeny says, hello, Sir Bob. I absolutely hate to wash dishes after eating. What about you? I love it when the dishes are done. I don't enjoy doing them, but I like a clean kitchen at the end. Norma, I don't like to eat, only very little and simple things. Yes. You know, sometimes simple foods are the tastiest. That can be true of a lot of things. Like I mentioned before, I really like bananas. I also like carrots and cucumbers, and they're very simple to prepare. Annette, thanks for this great lesson. It's a topic that's very useful. You're welcome, Annette. And Madi says, do your children know how to cook? Yes, a little bit. They know how to fry an egg. They know how to bake cookies. In fact, Jen and I don't bake cookies very often, but our kids bake cookies quite often. So they're starting to learn to bake a little bit, and they're starting to learn to cook a little bit. My second oldest son is actually a pretty good cook. He makes really cool things. If I make something and it's fairly simple, he makes it a little more tasty. He has a slightly better approach to cooking than I do. Let's see here. Siowu says, thanks, Bob. Panthera Nori says, do you use the word blender for that stick? Yeah, I'm not sure about your second sentence, Panthera, but we definitely use the word blender. In fact, it's coming up in a little bit in the lesson. It's one of the next slides that's coming up. Next question is from Nazanin, says kettle. Definitely, yes, we have a kettle. We have an electric kettle. We used to have one that you put on the stove and it would whistle when the water was hot or boiling. Now we have one that you plug in the wall and it just goes click. You have to listen for the kettle to click, and then you know that the water is boiling. Let's see here. Next question is not about the kitchen, so I'm going to skip it. Modine says, Mr. Bob, how's your winter starting off? It's good so far. Speaking of kettle and coffee maker, does the word percolator get used a lot as well? Thank you. You're one of a kind. So percolator is kind of like an older word for a coffee maker. We don't use it a lot anymore. I do remember hearing it as a kid, that someone would get a perk coffee maker or a coffee maker that percolated the coffee. So it's definitely a word people would recognize, but it's definitely an older word, Modine, for sure. Mamet says, hi, Teacher Bob. Do you like the kitchen? And what is your best food? Thank you. I just like pizza. I like making pizza. I like eating pizza. It's yummy. It's one of my favorite foods. And it's something simple, actually. Once you learn how to make the crust, it's a very straightforward thing to make. Madi says, I'm glad you can get some service from your children. They are very helpful, actually, Madi. It is, we're teaching them slowly to take care of themselves because, you know, eventually they move out. So they have to be able to do that. Diego says, Mr. Bob, do you have hot water on tap? It might help to do the dishes without a machine. Yes. So we have a hot water heater in our basement, and we have hot water available in the kitchen at the sink. When we turn on the kitchen faucet, we can choose hot or cold water. Definitely helpful when you are doing the dishes for sure. Zirel has the question, hi, dear Bob. Could you explain the difference between condiment and seasoning? So in North America, a condiment is usually something that you keep in the fridge. So something like ketchup or mustard or mayonnaise, we would refer to those as condiments. They are things that you put on sandwiches or hamburgers or other foods. So mustard, ketchup, and mayonnaise, we would call those condiments. A seasoning would be more of a spice. So maybe chili powder or cumin or paprika, or some of the herbs even like rosemary or thyme. So we would separate those two out. Definitely a condiment is something that comes in a jar and you put on food. That's how you do it. That's how I envision it. Alexander says yes. Excellent. Natalia is here. Natalia says, can we say warm up the tea in the sense of make? Can we cook or produce wine at home? Okay, so with tea, we always say, do you want some tea? I'll put the kettle on, okay? Or I'll boil some water. Definitely. And then when we pour the boiling water into a cup and put a tea bag in, we say that the tea is steeping, okay? But generally, we just say, we're going to make tea. I'm going to make a cup of tea. Do you want a cup of tea? I'll make a cup of tea for you as well. When you talk about wine, how do we talk about wine? People do make wine at home. I think we just use the verb to make. Like my friend's dad makes wine. He makes wine in his basement. He has all these big pails and he buys grapes in the summer and then he makes wine. We just use make, Natalia. We don't brew wine. I definitely think it's make wine. Yeah. If it was beer, you could say that you're making beer or you're brewing beer. But with wine, I think it's definitely make. Let me switch off members only chats. Let me get over to that setting and hit save. I do want to say, as I turn members chat off, thank you so much for being members. If you are someone who is supporting my channel, you're awesome. Thank you for doing that. I really, really appreciate it. Corey has the last one. My favorite food, a board of cheese and a glass of red wine. What about you? Do you like this kind of meal? Yes, that is definitely tasty. I like very old cheeses. So I like cheeses that have been aged well. And certainly cheese with wine is very, very tasty. We would usually on a board like that add some crackers and probably some different dried meats as well. Unless you're vegetarian, of course. Madi says, do you like noodles as a fast meal when you don't have time to cook? I like noodles. Yes, we often have noodles. So when we make a meal, usually it's a meal with noodles or rice or potatoes or bread. We usually choose some sort of carb, we call it carbohydrate. Sometimes it is noodles for sure. Let's see here. Next question. I'm going to skip the next question. Remember, people, when we're learning English, it's important to remember that you need to learn a lot of different words. So I just had a comment about, I'll just pass over it. I'm not here to say what kind of food is right or wrong. We're just here to learn English. Even if you don't believe people should, even though you might think people shouldn't eat a certain kind of food, that's not what we're here to argue or talk about right now. So let's see here. Sala says, is the kitchen a single room or the edge of the hall? So in most North American homes, Sala, the kitchen is its own room, okay? It usually has cupboards, appliances like the stove and oven, and it has a sink, and it is its own room. In some small apartments, the kitchen is just part of the wall of a larger room. So it really depends on the size of your room or the size of your house. Sorry, the size of your apartment or the size of your house. That can be a determining factor. We should get back to the lesson though. I do want to say hi to the 531 people watching. Hi, everybody. There's a subscribe button there. If you are interested, you should click it and ring the bell and you'll get notified when I do more lessons. Let's see here. I have to click the right button. We just talked about the mixer, bread machine. So this was a relatively new appliance about 20 or 30 years ago. We bought our bread machine for very little money, and you put all the ingredients in it and you push a few buttons, and then 4 hours later you have bread. Now, we actually don't use our bread machine just to make bread. We also use our bread machine to make pizza dough. So we'll put the ingredients in for pizza dough, usually some oil, some flour, some salt, some yeast, very simple dough. And we'll let the bread machine make the dough. And before it cooks it, we take it out and we roll it and flatten it. We let it rise, we flatten it, and then we bake pizza or make pizza with it. So bread machine, very handy appliance to have in the house. Someone earlier mentioned the blender. A blender is something that you use to liquefy things. So when you put a bunch of fruit in a blender and then you turn the blender on, it chops them so fine that it becomes a liquid. We use our blender to make what's called a smoothie. A smoothie is something where you put some water, some spinach, some peaches, some strawberries, some bananas, and it blends it together and it turns it into something you can drink. It's very, very good. We also have something called a food processor. Now, we don't own a food processor, but a food processor, oh, there's two pronunciations. Food processor, food processor. Oh, interesting. I didn't even know that. By the way, apparently you can say food processor or food processor. I didn't even, it's fun to teach these lessons because I realize how English is kind of fun and weird. Anyways, a food processor is used to chop up food. You can chop food up with a knife, but if you have a food processor, you can use it to chop up your food. We also have probably 3 or 4 cutting boards in our house. We don't cut our food on the counter. We don't take food out and put it on the countertop and cut it up or chop it up. We always use a cutting board because it's just better. You have to handle food properly because you don't want to get people sick. So we always cut our food on a cutting board or a chopping block. They are somewhat the same thing. A cutting board is maybe a little bit smaller. We, of course, have a fridge or a refrigerator. In North America, most fridges have a cold part on the bottom that is about 3 degrees Celsius. And then they have a freezer on the top that is below 0 degrees Celsius. So this is where you keep milk and fruits and vegetables and things that need to be cold. The freezer is where you keep things that need to be frozen. So we often, when we make a meal that's too big, we will often freeze the rest of the meal so that it lasts a long time and then we'll eat it later. So a fridge has 2 parts. It has a cold part on the bottom, that's called the fridge, and then the top part is called the freezer. Again, fridge is short for the English word refrigerator. I think most of you knew that though. We do not have a dishwasher. A dishwasher is a large appliance that you can put all your dishes in and then it will wash them for you. We do our dishes by hand, okay? So we do our dishes in the sink. When you talk about doing dishes, that's how you say it. You say, after the meal, we do the dishes. You can say wash the dishes. I think we use both. We wash the dishes after the meal. We do the dishes. But someone will wash some and then they will rinse and someone will dry the dishes. We had a dishwasher a long time ago, but when you have a lot of people in your house, sometimes it's actually faster to do the dishes by hand because we have so many dishes, they wouldn't all fit in the dishwasher. We, of course, do our dishes in the sink. So there are usually 2 sinks in a kitchen sink. Does that make sense? In a North American home, there's usually a faucet or tap, and there are 2 sides to the sink. So it just allows you a little more flexibility when you are using your sink. And of course, the sink has a faucet, and there is a tap for hot water, and there is a tap for cold water. And then usually, I don't know if you can see it, there's like a little thing on the edge that you can take out and you can shoot water on your dishes. I don't know the official name for it at all. Let's see here. Xiao Wu is asking if people use rubber gloves in the kitchen. We don't, Xiao Wu, but many people do use rubber gloves in the kitchen for sure when they're doing dishes. When you fry something like an egg, you use a frying pan. When you cook something like soup, you use a pot. So the only real difference between a frying pan and a pot is that a frying pan is not very tall. It's a very shallow pan. And it's used for frying things like maybe you're going to cook some vegetables, you're going to fry some vegetables, you're going to fry an egg, etc. A pot, on the other hand, is used for making something like soup, or if you are going to boil something. Maybe you're going to boil potatoes, like in this picture. You would use a pot to boil your potatoes. So pots and pans, that's something you hear often sometimes when people get married, they'll say, if people say, what do you want as a gift? They'll say, oh, we don't have any pots and pans. Maybe you could buy us some pots and pans. And kids, when they are young, like to play with pots and pans. Pots make really good drums, and pot lids make really good cymbals. Do you know what cymbals are? It's like, you can tell I'm not very musical. So kids love playing with pots and pans when they are kids. Kids like playing with pots and pans when they are kids. That was a redundant English sentence. Yes. Yes, kids definitely like playing with pots and pans. In our kitchen, we have a spice rack. This is a very common thing to see in a North American kitchen and probably in kitchens around the world. On a spice rack, you will have small jars of the most common types of spices that you would use. So often when I am cooking something or when I am making something, if the recipe calls for a certain spice, I will go to the spice rack and get it, and I will put that spice on in the amount that is needed. There is definitely a kitchen timer in most kitchens. Jen and I have slightly different methods of cooking. When I cook something or when I make food, I almost always set a timer. Jen kind of cooks more by taste and how things look. And she's just better at sensing when something is done. For me, if the recipe says to bake it for 20 minutes, I bake it for 20 minutes. I set the timer. When the timer goes off, I take the food out. Jen is a little more like, well, it could stay in for another minute or two. And generally her food tastes better than mine. So I think she's just better at that aspect of it. Rod says, my younger son makes a drum set out of pots and pans at home. Pretty quiet. Yeah. Pots and pans, when used as drums, are very, very loud for sure. We have oven mitts. When you take something out of the oven, it's very, very hot. So before you do that, you will put on oven mitts. Oven mitts are protective mittens that you use when you're taking hot things out of the oven. So we definitely have more than one pair of oven mitts. They're very handy. I'm always worried I'm going to forget to put the oven mitts on. Once we had a pair of oven mitts with a small hole in it, and I burned myself a little bit. That was not good. In the kitchen, you will probably have a grater. So if you have cheese or carrots and you want to grate it, so when you grate something, you rub it against the grater and it makes it into small pieces. A lot of times we will grate cheese before we put it on a pizza, or we will grate carrots or other things if we want to chop them really small. So in a kitchen, you will definitely have a grater. Earlier, I mentioned a few times that when you're making something in the kitchen, you will often use a mixing bowl. A mixing bowl is just a giant bowl. Okay, so a mixing bowl is a really big bowl that you use. You put all the ingredients in the bowl, and then you either stir them with a wooden spoon. Maybe like this person, you whisk it with a whisk. But a mixing bowl is used to mix ingredients before you bake them or cook them, whatever the recipe is calling for. By the way, that's how you talk about a recipe. When a recipe, it lists what you need, you say that's what the recipe calls for. Let me see here. We have cookie sheets. So there's different kinds of pans. One of the most popular ones in our house is called a cookie sheet. A cookie sheet is a flat piece of metal that you use when you make cookies. So we have 3 different cookie sheets in our kitchen. When we make cookies, we have cookies in the oven. We have cookies on a cookie sheet ready to go in the oven. And we usually have cookies on the 3rd cookie sheet that just came out of the oven. Fresh cookies are super, super yummy. We also have a colander in the kitchen. A colander is a pan with holes. So when you need to drain something like noodles, if you've boiled noodles in a pan or a pot, you would pour them into the colander in the sink, and then it would help you drain the water. We also have what's called a strainer, which is similar. You can see a colander is its own pot, whereas a strainer is something you use with a pot. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think you get my point. With a strainer, you can actually lift things out of boiling water as well. And then the last two things, you have measuring spoons, and you have, whoa, looks like I lost one of my slides. There is supposed to be a slide for measuring cup. So I'll just talk about it. Measuring spoons are very, very small. And on the measuring spoon, it says the amount. So it will say something like 1 teaspoon or 1 tablespoon, or it might say 15 milliliters or 30 milliliters. So there's two systems of measurement. And I'm not sure why measuring cups didn't show up. In our recipes, it'll sometimes call for 3 or 4 cups of flour. Don't say flowers. 3 or 4 cups of flour. Okay. So you will get your measuring cup. You will get the one that says 1 cup on it, and you will get the number of cups of flour that you need. Hey folks, I'm going to answer questions for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to wrap this up. So if you have questions that you submitted, hopefully I get to them in the next little bit. We'll see. Alvina says, hello, Bob. What exotic dishes have you tried? Well, there was a restaurant close to us that had Indonesian food, and I ate some really, really yummy Indonesian food a few years ago. But I have not tried to cook anything exotic, so I should sometime. Jordan, good morning, Mr. Bob. What is the difference between I like to cook and I like cooking? Thanks. So when you say I like to cook or I like cooking, they mean the same thing. I like to read, I like reading, they mean the same thing. So you can totally say either. They are identical. So if you like being in the kitchen and you like cooking or you like to cook, you can use either phrase. Let's see here. So Layadi, could you explain the difference between a refrigerator and a fridge? So we need to add a G and an E to that. Fridge is just the short version of the word. So we usually say fridge. It's just easier to say than refrigerator. That's a really big word. So we say fridge all the time. They are exactly the same thing. Nino says, have you heard about Georgian cuisine? I have not. I would love to travel the world a bit and eat lots of different kinds of food someday. We'll see. Let's see here. I'm going to skip the next one. I'm only going to answer questions about the kitchen. So hopefully, let me double check here. I think we are done. I think we're done. I think we did it. We did a whole lesson on the kitchen. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. If you are one of the 602 people watching and you're not a subscriber, please consider clicking that button right there. It's totally free. Thank you to all of you whose names are in green in the chat. You are people who have clicked the join button below and decided to support my channel. That is awesome of you. Here's a couple things you could do for me today. Number one, if you did not watch this past Tuesday's video, you should go watch it. I'll put a link to it in the chat right now. Nightbot will share that in a moment. The second thing I wanted to mention is this. I'm sorry I did not get a chance to put a lesson on my other YouTube channel today. So some of you watch my second channel a lot. I'll put a link to that channel in the chat as well. Nightbot will share that in a moment. I'm sorry, yesterday got away on me. I should have done that phrase, shouldn't I? Yesterday was a busy day, and I didn't really find the time to make a lesson. I know that's rare. There will be a new lesson starting on Monday. Anyways, last thing, if you did not understand some parts of this lesson, come back and watch that section again and turn the automatic subtitles on. If you wait about 4 or 5 hours or come back tomorrow, you can rewatch it. And then lastly, this video will be available in a couple days with no user questions if you want to watch it or listen to it for review. I feel like I'm going on and on now. You guys are awesome. It was so fun to do this lesson with you. I hope that you learned a few new words and for sure some new phrases. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to Todd and Dave for helping out. Thanks to Rod and Brent, the other English teachers from YouTube, for being here as well. And I'll see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with another English lesson. Bye, everybody. Have a good day.